Wood, U.S. Army retired, Executive Vice President for National Security and Defense, AFCEA International, who will introduce the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're pulling people back in from dessert break. Thank you for both enjoying lunch with us, but also coming back for what I think is two great panels that we have now to continue the conversation started by General Lynn. These two panels are actually going to take place back-to-back almost. There's a 15-minute break between the two panels, one panel, then 15-minute break, then the next. So you'll have a stretch break in place, and we can commence from there. A reminder that if you have any questions, you can just text or email them to askmedcos@gmail.com. And those questions will be read at the end for the panel. Of course, the moderator and the panel themselves have the ability to have their own conversations, own questions, and I believe we'll see the format works well to allow you to have some interaction as well. It's pretty interesting to hear General Lynn's comments and great HUA video that he had for DISA. We are very proud of the relationships we have with all of DoD, the services, and the agencies. And this event allows us to present a number of those agencies, to include DISA, out on our floor, which will open up at 1700. We have a packed exhibit floor. I hope you have an opportunity to visit with our exhibitors, the teammates, the people who are helping us build that future. I think at one point we saw a picture of all of the network diagrams that DISA has as part of their fabric and DNA, but also some of the simplification and some of the technologies that are going to make that efficient and effective. As I was looking at that diagram, I looked up at the AFCEA symbol up here and that old style network up here, and that's really what that world is about and what we've been involved with for 71 years. So we're very proud and happy to continue the conversation, continue it with DISA and their mission partners, as well as all of you in the audience. We're doing it today in the first panel, and we're talking about partnering for cyber innovation. So we have a mixture of representatives up here, and we are very happy to have this panel moderated and led by Mr. John Hickey, DISA's Cyber Development Executive and Director. Mr. Hickey is responsible for a very broad portfolio of cyber capabilities in support of DoDN. And his portfolio includes really much of what you would associate with what goes on in building and guarding the network, mobility, network operations, cybersecurity, and innovation. As the director, he's responsible for leading the acquisition, development, technology, insertion, and control over both cybersecurity and network operations solutions in support of DoD. When you think of DISA's input to the POM and the follow-through in terms of those sorts of expenditures, procurement, and implementation, Mr. Hickey is very much at the center of that. Prior to his role now in his current state, he was prior the DISA Cybersecurity Risk Manager, Executive, and CIO of DISA. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll enjoy this panel. I ask you to please welcome Mr. Hickey and our panel.
So the plan was to spend 3 to 5 minutes talking about innovation from my perspective within DISA, but how many folks would like to follow their director? Your role is to be out ahead of them. I had 4 or 5 areas I was going to touch on. I think he covered pretty much soup to nuts 10, and I'm playing catch up. So I told the panel a little prep work we did. We had a plan. I wouldn't say the plan met the enemy, the plan met the innovator, and therefore we're going to allow a little more freedom to cover a broader depth of areas. With that said, I have some of the innovation, but as the director pointed out, Mr. Rivera has the larger innovation effort as well, and again, Rick I. Barber is our acting. Is Rick I around in the room? All right. So again, it's a team sport on innovation, and we have our partners up here. I would tell you I'm going to emphasize, and I did as kind of a read ahead for them, 4 areas that I was going to focus on, because some of the other areas like cloud will be covered in other panels. It doesn't mean that I disagree with my boss's priorities. I just didn't, I wasn't going to cover Li-Fi and some of the HTML5 stuff and some of the other opportunities, but I let the panel go where they like in those areas if they're doing some interesting work and on some of the analytic pieces. So some of the top priorities that we're working on from an innovation standpoint, obviously, is assured identity. The director talked to that. We're working with chipset manufacturers, using some other transactional authority, doing things a little bit different to try and speed up acquisition on how we can generate a certificate on a hardware chip and provide that security associated with that, as well as the pattern of life that the director talked about. Those are ongoing activities, and we have 2 pilots ongoing in those areas. And then the POCs for those are Jeremy Cory, Major Nick Ziegler, and Brandon Iskey. So are those folks in the room at all? Look around. I want to connect you with the right people. If not, when I'm around on the floor, I will definitely introduce you to those true people that are doing the work in those areas. The other key that the director talked about is software-defined network. We call it software-defined everything, or enterprise as well. And that goes from everything that we're doing that came out of the CENTCOM initiative on a virtual data center that is now in the EUCOM, AFRICOM, AOR as the build. How do you tie that back into the network and the DoDN infrastructure, and what can you do in that space? And again, we have pilot activity going on and automated provisioning in that area, as well as looking at the different technologies, both COTS technologies and open source technologies that are available in that area. The other key piece is Gray Network. The boss talked to this. When I talk Gray, I talk Coalition Network, and he also alluded to commercial solutions for classified. So how do we leverage commercial encryption to provide that network? And then the real vision is, because all of these associate with the warfighter, how do you tie that network down into a network that's available to support coalitions when they hit the ground? Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, we built the network as we went along. We have many Citrix networks and coalition networks that are out there today. How do you collapse that? And you'll see this is kind of the hardware that I get to carry around all day, but just this is the endpoint hardware that I carry. I didn't bring my laptop because I try not to carry with that, but think of an unclassified tablet, think of a classified phone with a Wi-Fi device, think of my own phone, and then think of my unclassified phone. I didn't bring the TS phone, or the stack starts to grow, but what I'm trying to highlight in a visual depiction, both on the endpoint, but in the infrastructure, why can't we virtualize this and get after the technology that's out there today? We're doing it in cloud, right? The cloud providers are doing it. Why are we not there across the enterprise and even down to the endpoint? So mobility is key. That was the other piece that Boss talked about. We have and are doing innovative things in that area. But again, how do we take more risk and get after collapsing the endpoint devices at the same time we secure it? So those were the 4 areas that I were going to throw out there to the panel members. Again, the director covered many more than that, but kind of focused the discussion. But I will quickly introduce CJ Coppersmith is to my right. He's from HPE. He'll get into more detail as kind of his role and what he does on the innovation space. Gus Hunt is from Accenture Federal Services. We have Cory Musselman, who is from Leidos, and then we have Major General Jennifer Napper, who has a history within DISA, doing some interesting things years ago and supporting networks, so has a well-rounded background on active duty, but now she's with Unisys Federal Systems, and then Kevin Walker from Juniper. So I'll turn it over, and the format we're going to use is a couple minutes to talk about innovation. I lined up some questions that I'm going to ask them after that, but then the real goal is to get to the audience to get answers from the experts on what they're doing and what's of interest to you. Go ahead, please, CJ.
Thank you, John. So I'd like to speak about procurement, certification, threat mitigation, and mission resilience. The last time I was in this building, I think, was 25 or 30 years ago, and I was attending a National Security Center Conference, NCSC, and we were doing an Orange Book evaluation on an operating system at the C2 and B1 level. Included a model, million lines of code, test suite, audit and results. The primary threat then was information loss, and in the evaluated configuration, there was no attached network. This was a 3-year effort. Today, when I think things have improved somewhat, when people ask me what's involved with a product certification, I say, or a suite of certifications, I say about a year and about $1 million plus or minus 60%. And that means that certifications provide a level of assurance. They also provide a barrier to entry. They can even provide a barrier to security when you think about time to threat versus time to mitigation. So the technology and the threats have changed greatly, and we live in an age where the emerging threat is not necessarily loss of information, but the loss of capability. And the threat's shown itself as destructive malware that destroyed capability in the oil, banking, and entertainment industries over the last 3 to 5 years. And the standard that we need to move toward is addressing this emerging threat in this age of capability theft and destruction. This takes the form of corruption of BIOS, critical firmware, and data structures. And Moore Associates found that 50% of cyber analysts they survey found firmware corruption in their client systems. And loss of capability is loss of mission, and mission resilience has to be one of the most important attributes we can require in procurement. The paradox is that security standard and certification lags, as well as different standards and requirements across different agencies and services, can slow procurement and time to mitigation. And the reality is that security certifications provide baselines and they open markets, but vendors and communities have to spearhead security mitigations toward threats as they emerge, and then codify these mitigations through a standards process. The threat profiles no longer allow us to equate certification with security. We have to move ahead and move faster in a new model. Development, certification, procurement, and deployment cycles are ultimately very long and very expensive. And perhaps a focus on technical enablement of 853 technical controls, for instance, might be faster and more effective. Now, a promising point of innovation was released for comment by NIST 2 weeks ago. This was NIST Special Publication 800-193, and this moves us toward resilient computing platforms. And we really have to drive toward resilience that can protect, detect, and recover component integrity. This will help to preserve mission integrity. 800-193 specifies hardware root of trust, chains of trust, and automated recovery of integrity, the basis for resilient missions, and a shift from redundant systems to self-healing systems. I have a duty to say that HPE servers will provide this platform resiliency in our next generation of servers we announced last week with an immutable silicon-based root of trust, firmware integrity measurement, and automated integrity recovery. This gives you COTS resilient capabilities, so 800-183 is not just a draft standards, it's a reality, and trust me, you want this. The vision then is computing platforms comprising resilient components, orchestrated, provisioned, and monitored by a single, open, software-defined management plane with platform hardware roots of trust that allow chains of trust to pervade the compute ecosystem. The resulting mission environment comprises resilient services with assured integrity and recovery for self-healing mission and support. And that's where HP is going today. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Gus Hunt. I'm the Managing Director and Cyber Practice Lead for Accenture Federal Services. In a prior life, I spent 28 years at CIA and retired from there as their Chief Technology Officer. My thoughts are slightly different. I was trying to think about when we partner for innovation, toward what end? And because that's really what's going to matter as we try and drive this to a future. And so I want to propose that we're going to partner for innovation ultimately to shift the balance of power. As you know, offense may always have the advantage, right? There's that famous saying that's out there that defense has to be right every time, offense only once, that exists. But right now, the pendulum is way over to the side of the offense. And I think we all know this, we live with this every single day across the board. And so we're going to partner to deliver innovation. We want to partner to move that pendulum back more towards the side of the defense. And I think we need to set a really aggressive 5-year time horizon in order to make that happen and drive that. To the point on resilient systems, this is a critical component of that. I think about resiliency slightly differently, perhaps, which is that when you build cyber resilient systems, if you remember back in the 80s and into the 90s, hardware and software were trying to look at how they could basically build failure-proof systems. And then along comes this funny little thing called the cloud, which then reinvented the model that said it's not failure-proof, it's failure-tolerant. The ability for us to automatically start up new services in the event that something else failed, and then recover from that. In fact, recovery becomes a word that you don't have to worry about because it's really continuous operations for mission, not just simply being able to bounce back from an attack. And that's something that I think we have to begin to build in, and this is where things like software-defined networking and other forms of the cloud begin to matter and take hold. Right? I also believe that we have the technologies today to be able to do this. So we can build systems for tomorrow using the technologies for today, look at what we have to invest and innovate into the future, and use that as the mechanism to keep ourselves ahead of what's going on. As you're aware, the state of cybersecurity is really bad, and it's only going to get worse. Cyber is the world's first frictionless weapon system. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the moment anything gets released into the wild by anybody, everybody's knowledge is almost instantaneously enhanced, and then variants begin to come back and attack. Well, we're already getting variants of WannaCry. We got variants of Stuxnet within days after Der Spiegel published the decomposition of the Stuxnet approach, right, going attacking U.S. SCADA systems and things like that. The other problem we face is that because of this really rapid pace of cyber, the solution half-life is rapidly decreasing, and so point solutions no longer work. We have to think of solutions as far as integrated platforms and integrated sets of capabilities that are modularly designed that we can plug and play the best of the new capabilities very easily while deprecating the old without ever impacting our ability to do these things. And then we've got this problem with IoT. We are going to have an explosion of connected devices, which is going to be about 100 times the current size of the number of connected devices that are out there. And as you know, in a world of the weakest link, that's something that is just going to be really difficult to deal with, particularly given the fact that most people who make IoT devices that we're all going to live with don't think about it from a security aspect. They think about it from how am I going to make money on a smart device aspect, and that's really going to be problematic. So at Accenture Federal Services, we think there's 6 major focus areas to drive innovation as we go into the future. First and foremost in my book, something I have talked about for many, many years, is what I call data-centric security. How do we harden that soft, chewy middle of data so that when the event occurs, this is not an if, it's a when the event occurs, we make it really, really hard for our adversaries and our opponents to actually do damage within the system itself. 2 is what I call embrace the cloud. Embracing the cloud is really what this software-defined networking is just an aspect of. It is really software-defined networking, virtualization, elastic computing, all brought together in such a way so that you put everything in motion. And when things are in motion, they're really hard to attack, right? I can remember as an analyst working a long time ago on mobile ICBMs, the old Soviet threat. I don't know how many of y'all remember those days back. Great fear because mobile things are hard to find and hard to hit. We want to turn our environment into that form of agile mobility that make us hard to hit as well too. Identity is critical. I cannot emphasize enough assured identity. What I would say is it's not just identity about people, it's identity for everything. People, data, software, systems, and networks. Because without that strong, assured identity of everything, you cannot make good automated decisions. And we have to make automated decisions in the cyberspace at machine speed, not at human speed. That then steps into the next thing that is huge here, which is big data and analytics. All right, machine learning and AI, all those terms that you heard. It's about intelligent, automated defense to deal with all this stuff that's out there and the sheer volume of connected devices in order to be able to act in a manner that we can be very responsive to. That goes to proactive defense. Proactive defense means don't sit back and wait for your SOC 2 alarm. Go out, hunt, and kill something on your network. We already know, we found in almost every case that devices on the networks are already corrupted, and almost all of us are unaware of it. APT's average day, 241 days was the last number I saw. Somebody told me it's reduced to only 190 days, okay, before from infection to detection. We don't wait that long. We've got to turn that down to seconds, minutes and seconds to get there. Right? And then finally, it's all about great cyber hygiene. Build it right the first time and adopt DevSecOps for continuous build, continuous integration, and continuous delivery, which is what's going to keep us ahead of the game as opposed to having this very static, more static systems that we've typically been used to across the board. Right? So the bottom line for me is we can't win without changing our approach to cybersecurity. You all know Einstein's famous saying, which is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different outcomes. It's time for us to approach this problem, I think, radically differently, and that's what partnering for innovation, I believe, is all about. And while the existing approaches, while essential, are wholly insufficient, and those are the changes we have to put into place. We have the weakest link problem of the people, which will always be problematic, but the new weakest link with IoT is the one that really is going to be keeping us up at night a lot across the board. And we have to think about how we partner across not just the US and not just the government, but across the world to give us insights that we can't possibly be able to get. Most of us deal in the cyber realm through our own narrow little soda straw, seeing threats that come at us, right? How do we partner with guys like Amazon and Azure and Google who have global footprints that actually see things begin to occur inside of their networks long before they may ever reach US shores? And how can we get notified ahead of time as a part of engaging in a partnership, just as one example across the board? So I'll leave you with that and just conclude by saying that I think that partnering, we have to set a goal. And I think that goal needs to be that we're going to shift the balance of power back and towards in favor of the defense to the max extent that we can, and that's what our innovation has to be all about. Thank you.
I'm Cory Musselman. I'm a Director of Cyber Initiatives for Leidos Defense and Intelligence. In thinking about this panel and the topic, one of the hats that I wear is as the cyber lead, the PM for Leidos' net assurance support to DISA today. So I live this challenge on a daily basis. The volume and the increasing threat, the complexities of those threats, the constant change that occurs in the cyber realm, partnership isn't a nice to have between industry, government, and academia. It's a requirement for us to be a success. When I think about innovation, the common thought is to think about capabilities and technology, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that today. Those are all very important, and we're going to need them to be successful. I would take a different point of view. We also need to look at innovating with what we have today within the resource constraints we have and in different areas. One would be, from an operational perspective, are there more effective ways that we can set up our operations that allow us to share information better, to be more efficient and effective, to allow our defenses to be more resilient, and at the same time be able to lower costs so that we can take those cost savings and roll them into the capability investments. Would also challenge how we look at cyber. It's not a geographic fight. It is a global fight. We need to get into that mindset. We also have to look at how we look at the risks and the threats. Not all threats are equal in cyber. Not all of our components are equally fragile, and we need to work towards our threat and prioritize them. I think in the long term, we look at what's happening with encryption and the challenges in beating encryption. We may need at some point to take a hard look at where we put our investment. Is our investment at the boundary, or do we have to start looking at investment at the endpoint because of what encryption and the challenges it provides? I think one of the things we've talked about for a lot of years is security built in versus bolted on. We talk about it a lot, but there's still a lot in the way of security being bolted on as an afterthought as opposed to being built in from the beginning. And then lastly, I would say from an innovation perspective, I think we got to look at our talent, both in government and industry. We have to figure out a way to bring forward more aggressively highly skilled folks. We have to look at those skill requirements with technology changing so quickly. The mission's exciting that we support. We have to figure out a way to influence change faster to keep the interest of the folks that are graduating today. So while I do believe that innovation and capabilities technology is very important, I think there's other areas we can look at today to really get after this problem.
So good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Hickey and AFCEA, for allowing us to come together and discuss this interesting topic. For those of you all that don't know, retired 3 years ago from the Army, and I'm enjoying life in the commercial and the industry world. And I've learned a lot from industry, and so it makes me wonder what I could have learned had I been more open to partnering while I was still in uniform. So to those still in uniform, think through that. But I'm an Aggie who spent over 30 years in government. So I had to look up innovation. And it's very interesting because it's considered to be a new idea, technology, or method. And then I looked at the panel and realized I was sitting with a lot of engineers and CTOs and decided that I really shouldn't address the technology piece, but maybe talk about some of the other challenges. So if you're going to partner for cyber innovation, I think we first have to understand what is the DoD's tolerance level for innovation. Not to insult, but they have an ongoing mission. And it's a very critical mission, and there are people downrange dependent upon these networks. So is it simply sustaining innovation? You know, doing that little bit of evolutionary change that doesn't significantly affect the status quo, like putting in JRSS, which we talked about a decade ago, and which we're now doing, but it's hardware. What if we were bolder, willing to be a little bit more disruptive in our innovation? What if we truly thought about what General Lynn was talking about? Believe it or not, I thought about just skipping this whole part since he talked about it. But if we really think about the DoDIN as an operational domain, would you develop it differently? Would you build it differently? Would you operate it differently? So it's a domain we can design. We have this capability, and industry's already doing it. There are software-defined networks fielded in industry. It's out there. When are we going to be willing to accept those? And as someone else on the panel said, what Herculean certification and accreditation will they have to go through before they can actually adopt them? Could we partner differently with industry and academia and government, all in, kind of a project that would fundamentally redesign and implement the new domain, one that changes the rules of engagement someone else on the panel discussed. So the DISA leadership has asked for help in software-defined networking, mobile solutions, and commercial solutions for agility. And I think industry already has those solutions today. The question is, what will it take in the policy, the mindset, the ConOps, and the processes to be able to actually embrace those changes and incorporate them into the DoDIN? I firmly believe that while DISA and JFHQ DoDIN are doing everything they can to operate and defend the DoDIN today, we in industry and academia together should accept General Lynn's challenge. Bring these technologies and changes to them and actually show them what is working today. And I encourage everyone to take a look at some of those that are out there. But as I said, it's about the processes and ConOps as much as the technology. We were talking at lunch, Cory and I, and someone at the table said that there's about 12,000 sysadmins and CNDSPs on the DoDIN. Nobody in the industry would run a network that way. You couldn't afford to. So, you know, Gartner says in this Magic Quadrant, the best solutions are the shared services. And one of the things that you look at, those in industry that do that for commercial partners, you go into a SOC or a help desk or service desk area, and they may have 15 or 20 people on the floor, but they handle 15 to 30 accounts. and the guy's certified on 10 over here and 12 over here, and they only get the calls for the ones that are theirs to handle. And there's not a place where you have 50 different SOCs, one for each customer. That's not a reasonable approach. If DoD would look at that a little bit differently, they might consider doing something like that. And just for the record, almost every panel I've ever sat on slams the FAR and the acquisition. And over the last 2 years, I've learned the FAR doesn't preclude us from doing any partnering. And if you go to the good contracting officers and lawyers, they'll tell you exactly how you can legally and ethically do it. So I look forward to your questions and seeing you out on the floor looking at all the interesting industry solutions. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker. I'm the Security Chief Technology and Strategy Officer for Juniper. And typically when I'm the last on the panel, I can just say, yeah, what they said, and we can move on. However, I do bring a little bit of a different vantage point, being my entire career in industry. The only time I come to the East Coast is usually New York or Florida, so I'm glad to be here, have a little bit different experience. But what I will share with you is on this topic, and this is one of the things that drove me to be so excited about being here, is that we collectively have to do a better job. Pure and simple, full stop. We've had the stateful packet firewall for 30 years, and we're still deploying firewalls, right? And I think that at the end of the day, we have to say, look, we have a tremendous arsenal of technology at our disposal, but we have to be bold, to use the term earlier, to actually make it an investment, not in financial investment, but a mind shift investment in how we're going to attack the cyber problem. We also don't do a good job collectively of sharing. We just don't, especially between public-private. There are insights that, even in the unclassed world, that you have that we don't, and vice versa. In the public domain, usually it's our legal team saying we can't share. Well, we need help there. We need to kind of rethink this through. But the good news is that the learnings from the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google, are things we can adopt. Yes, they're hyperscale, but they don't have 12,000 admins. They don't have anything near that. They automate their way through. They have to. They do fail fast. We fail fast. If it doesn't work, great. Drop it and move on. Now, I'm saying this clearly from the public domain. However, private domain, but having said that, there's some of the technologies and operational efficiencies that do apply and we can use and leverage to build a much better cyber platform. From the perspective as a long-time practitioner, multiple times CISO, I've always asked the very simple question. If every successful attack occurred over the network, well, why doesn't the network catch it, right? Versus having enforcement zones that we just happen to catch the badness. We have to really look at the problem differently and to engage every network node to be an active participant. And lastly, on the talent front, this is something that we're not going to, even if we start today, we have 21 years before we can actually use the next generation of talent, right? We have to rethink this, which means twofold. One is leveraging technology far better, especially on the insights and analytics. Automation, I had a rule of thumb for my teams in the past, if you did a task twice a week or more, it was subject to automation. By the way, when we did that, we certainly eased up a lot of not only the repetitive work, but we put time back in their pockets, and we were able to go to a DevOps model much easier by making sure that we used automation where we could. But we also have to make sure that we're teaching not just the SMEs, the subject matter experts in security. That's the easy part. It's anyone who designs, deploys, or supports a application or service has to also be not trained, but educated in cyber, so that when we actually deploy, it's deployed properly. It's out of the gate in a much better position than we are today. In industry, we don't do that in general. You have pockets of excellence, but by and large, we don't. We have training. Well, you train to drive a car. You educate to build a car. And I think we need to be very realistic with ourselves to say, look, we're not going to be able to leverage 12,000 admins, but what we can do is to train and have champions within every domain and every specialty to be educated in cyber.
Well, Thank you. I'm going to ask you a couple broad questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. You've talked a little bit about, areas that are important and areas that we can look to industry to do better and some of the technology out there. I'd like it just from the panel's viewpoint, how does the government and industry partner better? We have CRADAs, we have pilots, we have things that get after technology, but as the gentleman, Cory said, who's in operating a lot of our operations centers, a lot of it is process driven, a lot of it is a better way of doing business. How can we partner and get to those efficiencies? Because we don't see a lot of new dollars. So you really have to execute in that year of execution to find efficiencies to do something new or cut, find an offset. What are your ideas in how government and industry can partner better to get after some of these core innovative capabilities that we're looking for to actually deliver to the warfighter and provide the efficiencies we need with built-in security? Go ahead, guys. Give it a go. I'm going to mix it up.
You're going to mix it up on us. Okay. So I think, I'll be honest with you, I think that is really kind of the million-dollar question. In a constrained budget environment, how do you create an opportunity to capture dollars that you can then reinvest to go down and do something new for the future? And there's only, in my book, there's two ways this happens. One is you bring in something, automation and things like that you begin to put on the floor that can then free up resources, begin to focus someplace else. Or two, right, you stop doing something that you've got in there, you take those dollars on purpose and repush them to the future. Right? In the case of doing something new to grant efficiencies, there's a number of ways to be able to go at this. One is what are the managed services play is a classic example of this. What are the things that are quintessentially critical for government themselves to do, that they must do in order to deliver mission, versus the things that your contractor providers and partners can do much better than you can because they already do these things at scale in ways that you can't approach, right? And this was the absolute, one of the attractive features of the cloud was this exact thing, right? Which is somebody else manages and runs the infrastructure when it was just IaaS, right? So much better than we can possibly do it ourselves, allowing us to focus our precious dollars and our precious resources up the stack to deliver better business and mission outcomes across the board, right? And that's what we have to look for. What are those opportunities? Where are they? And then how do we turn these things over to enable us to drive those things within the year, capture those dollars, and reapply them? If you permit one more quick thought, I also think that in government, we have to really think about this in the fact that we are going to invest with a strategic focus. Too much of our money is tied up in basically just day-to-day run stuff, okay? We have to intentionally create that pyramid of run, grow, transform, and that's a painful act that's got to happen from within the organization itself. Every government organization, DISA, DOD, my old organization at CIA, you have to sit down and you have to say, we are going to reshape that pyramid into the one that makes sense, and you have to go at that aggressively and with intent and stay focused on it, because it's too easy for every dollar to get subsumed into just day-to-day running stuff across the board.
I'm going to throw it down to the end of the table just to give fair time. So Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, from the perspective of industry, is, look, we've done a lot in technology in the last decade and a half. For example, open source has been around forever, but now we're all talking about it. There's a reason why we're using it in industry, because the more you leverage the insights and the creativity of others is by far for the betterment of that product or that app or that service. It works. It really does work. Yes, of course, as a security practitioner, many of my peers say, oh, it's open source, I can't touch it. Well, we passed that hurdle. The same thing with collaboration within each other. There's a lot of collaboration that's done within the private sector that we don't really see a lot of, and that's because we're trying to solve a very difficult problem. So I think one of the things I think would be very good is to narrowly focus on an achievable cyber issue, not trying to boil the ocean, but one that makes sense, that we can all sit down and I would give 2 engineers, John would provide 2 engineers, and so forth, until we have a small a Tiger team to focus on that one problem, bringing in the differing approaches and views to solve it. I will give you an example. We're talking assured identity as an example. That's a big problem. That's a huge problem. But what if I said we could figure out where identities flow within the network? That's a much smaller piece of the bigger problem. Well, how do we do that? Well, I can help, you can help. We can work together on smaller tasks like that. But what that does is not so much solving that problem, but it builds the relationships. And that's what we haven't had, I think, in general. The triad of academia, industry, and public is an ongoing matter that we need to nurture. But I think coming together, and so, I mean, this has worked in the past, but in my experience, where we pull together small teams, they come back and magic happens.
Ma'am?
Yeah, so many of y'all in the room probably remember Dr. Linton Wells. He used to pull together something called a Highland Forum, and it was an eclectic group of folks, some authors, some movie makers, some computer scientists, college professors, and a couple govies, not very many so we wouldn't taint the room. And he had put a problem set on the table. Now, the one I attended was right after Hurricane Katrina, and the problem set was, of course, that comms lagged for days and days in that humanitarian disaster. And so he said, I'm going to do this a little different. He put the eclectic group together over here, and then he went on the internet and said, I'm going to have an exercise. And but he said the government couldn't come for 36 hours. So a whole bunch of people showed up with solutions and began to share information on their own without the policies, without the governance, without the strict rules that the government would have imposed. And what we had was blow up satellite antennas and people using Google and doing very creative crowdsourced solutions that would meet the needs. That was a decade ago, when you see a lot of those today in the inventory. A lot of those things are being used today. I believe those kinds of forums where you have an eclectic group that doesn't necessarily sound like they would belong together, put together in a room for a day and a half, 2 days, to work on a particular problem like Kevin said, and it's all volunteer, there's no pay. And you take off the Unisys and the Juniper when you walk in the room, and you just throw ideas around, I think is the way we can move forward on the stickier cyber solution problem sets.
Cory or Gus?
So I agree with all of what's been said so far. I would add to that, I think we also have to take a look at how fast things change. When we look at the requirements that are being drafted, it's taking longer to draft the requirements, and the technology is passing it by the time it's ready to deploy. If we look at more shared risk-reward partnerships, where you get things started faster in prototypes in labs that have published APIs, if you look at what Google and Apple do in terms of a lot of their kits, those APIs are published. Any third-party vendor can code against those. They know exactly what they're getting. They know exactly what environment they're getting into. If we get into those kind of shared environments with the early API documentation, we do get to that, what's been said earlier, right? We get to that fail faster. We're not going to get it right the first time. We need to fail fast so we can get on to the next thing. And I think if we move towards that kind of shared risk reward, that openness from a documentation, an API perspective, we really have an opportunity in conjunction with a lot of what's been said already to tackle this.
Sorry, CJ, last word.
Okay, I see two domains of collaboration, really. One is collaboration around threat mitigation, and the other is around collaboration around capability. And the interesting thing about threat collaboration is that if something is a threat to DISA and to DoD, odds are it's a threat to critical infrastructure. So broader, more open threat sharing and rapid collaboration and mitigation planning and strategies is one area. The capability collaboration, I think, can be more specific, perhaps more closed, but then always be feeding that threat mitigation back. I think that as security specialists, when we think about threats, we immediately want to confine the information. everybody knows about them at the end of the day, and sharing and collaborating rapidly is, I think, going to be really important.
Okay, I'm going to give one last question up here, and then I'm going to turn it to the audience. I'm sure there's many questions out there. In the cyber portfolio and the NetOps portfolio, we have a lot of tools. Most of those, if not all those tools, are COTS. There are some GOTS with a top on it, if you will, with some very specific code on it. But many of those tools do not communicate in a seamless manner, and they're expensive and have proprietary solutions associated with them. We are going through the NetOps tools, and I do see a convergence of NetOps type things with defensive cyber operations. Those capabilities, and many of the people at the table producing some of those capabilities are converging. So there's some opportunities there for cost savings and what I'll call better integration. When I took over the cyber directorate, I found that we would have an email gateway that didn't necessarily talk to the web content filtering capability, that we'd pull it together later from all the data sources. There's COTS capability that will help you integrate some of those functions together, but you're going to pay for that as an overhead and sometimes a straw. You're going to suck through from a cost standpoint how much data you're pushing through. So if we could give a short idea of how does industry and government look to innovation to help us in delivering integrated capability. And I'm not going to let you answer yet because I'm going to push back a little bit on the concept of just go to the cloud. Well, just going to the cloud means that some of the investment we've already made in security is repurchased in the cloud at various different areas, and then I have to worry about what if I have to disconnect from the cloud because things are going so bad. We say things aren't happening in the cloud, but we all know they are happening in the cloud, especially infrastructure for service. So don't forget that tidbit, at least from the government side. I would love to just say, yeah, just go to the cloud, we'll push everything off there. I don't have to invest in regional stacks, I don't have to invest in perimeter, but those are already invested in. I don't have to invest in endpoints because it's all going to be provided to me from the cloud at a very cheap price. So I'm interested in your thoughts in that area, and I'll start in the middle this time. So go ahead.
All right. So again, as leading my team of global analysts supporting DISA today, we live this integration challenge on a daily basis. I would take the approach that a solid cyber operations strategy is a starting point to understand where the agency wants and needs to go from a defensive cyber operations perspective and a NetOps perspective. From that, building an enterprise architecture which ties together, takes your requirements and what you need. That then can act as a catalyst as you evaluate your capabilities, whether it be you need to do adopt, buy, create decisions. I also think we need to start looking at our suite of tools as a suite and not individual capabilities. Looking at them in individual capabilities, acquiring them in individual components will lead us down the path of things not talking to one another. But from the industry side, I think we have to drive towards capabilities that are built on open standards and more away from proprietary information and proprietary code. Doing those open standards and open source gives you the ability to lean on the globe, quite frankly, to ensure security within those tools and to continue to modernize them. It gives you a greater flexibility and allows you to be more agile as the cyber environment changes. You can make changes more quickly because you're not tied into integrated and proprietary components. Again, right, to use the example I used prior, right, again, look at what Apple and Google do in terms of their API sets. Open standards that are published, I think all of those are paths that we can go down to lessen the integration costs and, again, take those lesser costs and invest them in additional capability.
Ma'am?
Sure. As a NetCom commander about 5 years ago, it seemed to me that we had about 50 tools too many, and we're only using half of them for half their capability. I would take a little bit different approach. I agree with everything Cory said, but what information do you need for what decision or action? And how much of it should just be machine to machine? And I think that's the approach when you start looking at what tools do you really need, How much should just be, as Kevin said, machine to machine taking care of the network itself, and how much is because you need to take an action? And that might clean up some of the plethora of tools that have grown out there, or the next tool that gets slapped on and you only use 2% of its capabilities out there. And I know we've all been through this several times between the Army doing its convergence of NetOps tools for the deployable, and it seems to be cyclical. Instead of asking the hard questions of what do you really need the information for, what action are you going to take?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I couldn't agree more that many of us have too many tools. Some of them are required either by regulation or statutes or whatever, but what I like to do is to have, when I talk to my peers, is look at your bill of materials, your portfolio, and look how much time your team is applying to the care and feeding of that portfolio. And I actually did that exercise in my last role, 42%. And I had an amazing team. I'm thinking you're wasting, basically, in my view, 42% of your time just care and feeding the bill of materials. So I said, okay, I'm gonna grab a number, 10. You can have 10 out of that portfolio. The rest go away. And they said, well, why 10? I said, because I can count that, right? But at the end of the day, the point I was trying to impress with them is that, look, there was an old product, but still around PGP, pretty good privacy. And in my field, pretty good was good enough, because we're never going to get to perfection anyway. So what can we use from the arsenal that we have and best leverage that? That means the pressure back on the industry, on the vendor. But the holy grail of them talking together, John, ain't going to happen. I think it will begin in his pivoting towards the open source and open APIs. But one of my startups was my bread and butter was being different from other people. So then you're telling me, no, I've got to play well with them. It ain't going to happen. But I think over time, we'll see less and less of those point solutions and more open standards based, and certainly from your vendors today, open APIs. In our case, all of our current products that are on the cloud-based, sorry, John, but cloud-based are open API-based. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be honest with ourselves and say maybe too much is too much.
Well, it better be a damn good tool or I'm not playing, okay? Go ahead, CJ.
Thanks. Well, when you think about the things that are least likely to interoperate, they are the things that are very old and the things that are very new. And then you're trying to put them together with your mainstay and incumbent infrastructure and application. And I really do think that you're on the right path, that a software-defined management and control layer is probably the only hope. And you may have to shim or widget something together, but through time, if we invoke open standards, that should start to all play together. So I think that's the challenge.
Gus, you get the last word.
Wow, so everybody's already said almost everything I have written down here, so it's really great to hear or at least get validation on these things. I don't think, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to really adopt the approaches that have emerged out of this new world with the Googles and the Facebooks and things like that, where they build their systems to be modular, they do continuous integration and change, and they fully adopted DevSecOps so that security is squarely in everything they do from day one as part of any software development or code integration, things like that. And it's that approach which allows us then to really think about the fact that because the technology moves so fast, we have to think about the fact that we're going to be constantly innovating within that space, meaning putting things in and taking things out. I think to your goal about the money, I think when you're going to put something new in, the real desire or goal ought to be that when I put in something new, it actually saves me resources of what I was spending in the past and reduces the load and automates some other process or something along those lines. Because simply plugging in a new something that just adds to my bill of the long tail of support that I have to do and doesn't alleviate any pressure at some other point is something we ought to just not do, right? So that's how I would begin to think about and approach that. And that modularity with open APIs, common formats and open standards, and also must be proven scalable and proven performance, because the last thing we want to do is to bring in you something at the scale of DoD and discover that it really is at the scale of some mom and pop shop or something like that. So.
Listening to the other guys talk, there's one other thing that I think I would encourage. As Gus said, when you're bringing in that new thing and you want to replace some things, make sure that the policy guys that can tell you no are in line with you. Because it doesn't help to have one part of DoD CIO understand all the technology and stuff that they want to do to the network on the policy side not catch up, or any other organization like that. Not throwing hammers at DoD CIO, I'm just saying, because there's a policy guy every place. So you got to know who can tell you no and make sure they're on board before you go down that path.
Well, again, I think it's time now. I think I left about almost 20 minutes for audience questions. I will say, and I'm going to set up some folks that are coming after me and other panels. We're going to talk about NetOps and cyber tools convergence and the pure number of tools we're using. There's a panel discussion on that, so JT, Travis out of my shop is there. You'll get more details in that area. We're going to talk about a cyber build strategy that's sitting on the director's desk, and the director is very involved in the strategy as well, I would say, as the tools, right? Because operators are giving us requirements, but the hard question of what does that tool do and what lane of service is it providing and who are the users and what is the data behind that, we're tracking those. So we're making, the good news is many of the things I've heard here I think we're after, and we could definitely need more help in that area. But again, I still think the key is how do we continue to innovate and then collapse some of those tools and capability and leverage the cloud for the things that they do well, and where does that make sense? Because there's some legacy things that the cloud doesn't even want to deal with, some of the older systems that we run, mainframes and others. So there are some unique pieces that we still have to figure out how to provide security for. All right, I don't know where the person in the sky is that has the questions, so.
Thank you. The first question is directed to General Napper. From your perspective, what DoD policies and TTPs need to be changed or adjusted to allow DoD to be more flexible and receptive to adopting disruptive technologies?
So a couple that I've run into in the last 2 years that I thought we had buried some time ago come to mind. We stood up a capability called Commercial Solutions for Classified and a certification process whereby vendors could take their capabilities and get them certified to be used on networks. And in addition to doing that, which I think someone on the panel says cost about $1 million in a year of your life, now other agencies want to slap on other requirements and add more rule sets and prevent organizations from adopting new technologies faster. So it's not, so that's one area where if there's already someone who says it's good enough and it works right for doing that function on the network, then I don't think policymakers below should be able to override that. The second one that comes to mind is in the actual acquisition process, and that is that the FAR Part 12 talks to you about buying commercial capabilities and a way to speed that up. And warms my heart to hear that DIS is moving out on looking at how to do that faster and using that in OTAs and other processes. But there are still organizations within DoD who think that they have to go and do DOT&E checks and milestone checks in order to put a commercial IT solution on a network. And that is not necessary. So there are areas like that that need to really be looked at.
Thank you. For the panel in general, in the space of resilient systems, what is being done to secure the supply chain?
I'll take a start at that if you don't mind. I
Sure.
know that CJ talked quite a bit about that. I'm sorry, CJ talked a little bit earlier. It's a problem, but we know it's a problem. That's the first step, right? We have 11 to go. There are several organizations of which I know that HPE, Juniper, and others are involved with a trusted computing group, among others. But that's, I think, a foundation, a basis, but not sufficient. And here's what, from our perspective, we think we need to do, and that is to be more transparent. We're not as transparent as I think we can be in the supply chain. There's some some of the customers we keep talking about, like a Google and so forth, they're demanding it. So we're working together with Apple and Google in particular to see what is the right level of transparency, one that we're comfortable with, but also one that helps to solve the problem. So for example, the firmware embeds that was mentioned earlier, those are hard to find, right? We know the reality of most of our silicon plants are not directly under our control, because unless you're a handful of companies that actually are in semis today. But we have to do a much better job of their supply chain process as well. The consideration that has happened in the fintech world, where devices in shipping were intercepted, embedded, and then continue the shipping, was a problem that we all knew that could potentially happen. You know, we work well with the carriers, but when it happens and then they're impacted, you know, money goes into the wrong direction, we have to do a lot better job. But I will say that it's a very difficult problem. It's one that we are working, and I think it's one that in the private sector in particular, we have to work far better together. On the public side, we need some intelligence to help us as well.
Thanks. So this is something that where HPE spends a lot of effort and pays a lot of attention. We participate in GuideUp, which is an industry-wide notification of known counterfeit items. And I think that standard that I talked about, NIST 800-193, with mathematical firmware integrity checks, goes a long way toward mitigating supply chain interdictions, abuses, by always proving that the firmware that the system is booting with is the firmware that it was manufactured with, and further that it's the firmware that it was supposed to be manufactured with. Still, it is a global supply chain. We have to look toward mathematical protection, strive toward geography-neutral security, but at the same time perform onshore mitigations and manufacturing where critical. And I guess the one thing I'd say to this audience is TAA is different from component sourcing. So if you don't want components from a certain country, say that. Please don't just say TAA. TAA doesn't do the job. TAA is job protection, not information protection or security. Thank you.
Next question, I think.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Hickey. How is DISA handling mission resilience as the panel discussed?
Yeah, that's a softball. I thought I didn't have to answer any questions. Thought I got to be the moderator. Again, when you're talking about mission resilience, and again, context of that is kind of hard, so I'm going to run with what I think, and again, I don't know that I'm going to hit the exact point, but resiliency to our mission, and primarily that's from a cyber standpoint perspective, I'm going to take in a network perspective, is to ensure that the network is always available to our warfighters for our mission set. And I think from that perspective, we are looking at, we haven't talked up here on the panel a lot about our NASCAR initiative, but from a cyber standpoint, what is that threat that we face today, and what are our tools and capabilities that we have presently in that joint venture between DISA, NSA, and the DoD CIO, with the services participation on how we defend that network, and then what are those decisions from this threat framework that we're going to use to inform future decisions. And again, the concept is that always-on network, whether it's SATCOM, fiber, the last mile piece that we can assist with in the future, or I think where you're going to see that change is what does the cloud and the more level 4 and 5 type applications we put there, what does that mean, and what is DISA's role in enabling that from a security standpoint, as well as supporting that as it provides some new and interesting latency to our mission set. And again, much of our mission set of where we fight is overseas. So having nice cloud providers in the States is great, but you know you can't store U.S. information, or we wouldn't want to necessarily, in a foreign provided cloud instance. So it makes for a combination of a hybrid on-prem, off-prem. I'm not sure if that's where you were going with the question, but that's my shot at it. So.
Thank you. The next question is, would the panel please share their thoughts on how, at this critical juncture, to get the lawyers more accommodating and understanding on the key exchange of information that must take place between industry and government?
Well, I'm not answering that one, so I'll hand that to the panel.
I don't blame
Where's
you.
Mr. Brazes? I didn't answer. Quote me, all right?
So, interesting enough, this is kind of one of the discussions that AFCEA leadership was having yesterday about how we can better educate government, not just lawyers, but government, on the real rules that are there and propagate that throughout the organization down below. I think if you go into someplace like the Pentagon, you're going to find that the lawyers understand the rules really carefully. The problem is the interpretation when you get to lower levels quite often. And so I think if we continue, industry and professional organizations like AFCEA, continue to engage with the leadership in the government to explain, you know, maybe they should publish here's the rules and the things you can do and can't do, right? I think that would help tremendously and clean up some of the interpretations being done at lower level commands.
So if I can, I think
Sure.
one of the other aspects is this trust. If is a word I really don't like the word trust, because I don't think there's actually any such thing. As really is assurance, which is I like your assured identity thing. But the ability for people to share information with the confidence that it's only going to be used in the manner to which it is intended to be used. It is not going to disadvantage somebody over somebody else, so industry sharing back with government. You don't want to find out that what you shared then created a competitive posture that somebody else could take advantage of. And likewise, government sharing information with industry, a lot of the information we want to be able to share, the government wants to be able to share, may be classified or sensitive for other natures, and when shared with industry, needs to be protected appropriately across the board. And so we have to create capabilities. I'll go back to my data-centric security argument when I first opened on the channel, that essentially create that level of assurance that the information itself is appropriately protected, appropriately stored, and appropriately shared only with those for whom it was intended and for the purposes for which it was intended. And that would go an enormous way to both ameliorating the lawyers and encouraging, I think, much more effective sharing across the board.
Yeah, I'd add that shared information isn't necessarily public information, and I'd in fact use the lawyers to create contractual constructs so that you could share without things going public. And I acknowledge that there will always be a classified side to that, but often commercial concerns aren't willing to share because it can affect their stock price, for instance.
Yeah, there's also another aspect with the sharing from the private sector, and that is we have a gap in legislation, to be candid. If I were to share with CJ what I see on my network about what's happening in HPE, my GC is saying don't know, because if that turns into litigation on CJ, now we're pulled into litigation. So we need relief. We need help there. I think that's an area where, in fact, there have been several Senate bills over the years, and they've kind of either lost this aspect. Some state AGs are stepping up, but we do need relief and help there, because it shouldn't. My position as a good steward or good citizen to share what I see about somebody else should not come back to haunt me.
All right, I think we got time for one more, maybe, quickly.
Yes, thank you. We went to the CAC for logon because the infrastructure was already there. how long will it take to implement a biometrics capability?
So I think I'll take that one. I think the biometric capability is already there in many spaces on the endpoint especially. And then how do you leverage that? So again, we have this ability to derive a credential from the CAC, and we call it a purebred capability. So it's an online portal. You don't have to touch anything. You can actually do it via the portal. It's taking the trust from the vetting that's already done, that was done with the CAC card, and then you can put it on a tablet in the TPM, or you could put it in the hardware root of trust on some of the mobile devices. That's there today. I'm using derived credentials. I'm not using CACs on any one of these devices. So what I think you'll see added is, again, we're leveraging on the NIPRNet side the biometric piece. You've got capability on tablets that have iris and others. You'll see more, without talking about a specific vendor, you'll see more of that coming out, and it's already out in the latest piece. It's how we leverage that. So I think that is a good partnership that we do have with industry, and working with those endpoint providers to build that in. And then what the director talked about is, can we actually even go into the chip side so that's delivered at time of arrival, much like companies have done in the radio business for years, as an example, right? So, anybody else like to elaborate or have their own views?
Well, just really quickly,
Sure.
going back to the previous discussion about sharing data, think about what it's going to take to leverage biometrics so that it can be shared effectively across domains and industry and things like that, because your biometric information, as I understand it, from a legal standpoint, is not treated in the same way as things like a password and those sorts of things, stuff that's in your head versus things which you actually leave all over the environment and therefore are viewed differently from a legal perspective. So that's an area that, as we drive down the biometric pathway for assured identification, that we're going to have to, I think, get really clearly addressed.
And I'm sure the lawyers will be involved.
All right. Well, again, panel, thank you very much. Again, let's give them a round of applause, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lieutenant General Bob Wood back to the stage to formally thank the panel on behalf of AFCEA and our audience.
Well, we have a panel up here of remarkable insights and perspectives, and this topic of the panel was Partnering for Cyber Innovation. And as you can see, with the variety of perspectives and potential capabilities generated by these gentlemen up here and Ms. Napper, we find that we've got a remarkable, diverse ecosystem and solution set, not only on the panel, but you'll see on the floor here shortly. I would like to thank John for bringing this group together, for allowing us to understand these perspectives. And before you leave, I want to just remind the audience that there's about a 15-minute break between now and the next panel. At 3:45, we go through DoD Collaboration for Success. So we have Partnering for Innovation, and next we'll have DoD Collaboration for Success. I'd ask the panel, or I would tell the panel that on your behalf, we are making a donation to the Fisher House. We thank you for your time, your insights. We'll break for about 15 minutes. I'll release the panel and bring on the new panel, and at 3:45 we'll commence with the DoD Collaboration for Success in Cyber. Thank you very much. Give them another hand.